Very warm welcome to this new edition of our Research Futures webinar. My name is Leila Shukran. I'm Professor of International and Director of the University of Portsmouth, theme in democratic citizenship. Today, we're extremely delighted to welcome Justice Srikrishna, former Indian Supreme Court Justice and many other things. This meeting is organized or co-organized with the South Asian International Economic Law Network and Professor James Nedumpara, who sends his apologies because he's busy with the hearing, but certainly supporting us. So, well, today is going to be quite special discussion with Justice Srikrishna because over the course of his career, he's hold a number of really interesting positions in Bombay to start with, then in Delhi at the Supreme Court, and he's never really stopped working in arbitration, and he's become, and he's going to explain why, somehow the favorite justice or former justice of all Indian governments. So I'd like to show you, to start, the sort of structure of the presentation. And then, as you will see, we're going to have a quite free discussion with Justice Srikrishna. If you have questions, kindly use the chat box to write them down, and I will read them to Justice Srikrishna at the end of our conversation. So the title of today's discussion, Mediating Justice, Expertise and Independence in Judicial and Non-Judicial Contemporary Settings. We'll start with, indeed, the idea of justice and the formative years in Bombay, how Justice Srikrishna has moved from lawyering to judicial work, and in particular, a very important report he's produced known as the Srikrishna Commission, based on the investigation of the causes and the blame for the riots in Bombay at the beginning of the 90s. Then we move to his work at the Supreme Court, and then again, his work as an expert. You see here a picture of himself releasing his data protection report. And later, we'll move to some other consideration on the idea of Indian philosophy and how it has, or it has not, let's see, inspired his work. So without further ado, Justice Srikrishna, I'd like to give you the floor, and we can start our discussion. So tell us, you originally come from Bangalore, actually, and you moved then to Bombay for your studies and for the start of your career. How did this happen?
Well, it happened this way, that my father, he was brought up in the old Mysore state. He graduated. He was also a lawyer. He graduated and thereafter took his law degree from the University of Mumbai, from Pune at that time. And then he went back to practice in the district courts of Mysore. He was a young man probably in his early 20s, very ambitious, who thought that Mysore was too small a pond for his abilities, and he wanted to swim in the larger ocean of Mumbai, called Bombay in those days. So he decided one day to pack up and come and try his luck in Bombay. All his elders advised him against it and said he had no souls of acquaintance, no sorts of friends here to help him, and how on earth is he going to manage? He was as devout as his ambition took him, and he said, as long as God is there, I'm sure I'll come up. And by Jove, he did come up. He became one of the famous lawyers in the country. He was practicing in the Supreme Court and the High Court of Bombay. And it happens that my mother comes from the Bangalore city. Her parents were in Bangalore. And when I was born, my mother went to her father's place to give birth to me in the initial stages of childbearing. And technically, I was born in Bangalore, but then I've been in Mumbai, then called Bombay, right from the time I was a 3-month-old baby. So as it is with the Indian scriptures, particularly the Bhagavad Purana tells you about the great Lord Krishna, who was born in one city and was brought up in another city, and somewhat like that. Bangalore is the place of my birth, but Bombay has been my karma bhumi as the field of my operations all throughout.
So tell us, because I suppose that not everybody is well aware of that. How was Bombay in the 60s, 70s at the time you studied, at the time you started your legal career? Was it very much still influenced by, the British system? How so? Was it cosmopolitan? Was it not?
Yes, in fact, I would say I was born towards the end of the Second World War. I remember we used to stay in a building which was next to the main highway in Mumbai city. The road led all the way from the hinterland to the harbors. So you used to see a lot of military transport going on all the time during the World War. I was very young, hardly about 2 years. But I have faint memories of seeing those military tanks moving on the streets all the time. And then when I grew up, Mumbai was it had retained most of its British influence. People talked English most of the time. And it had a great cosmopolitan city. There was no concept of the city belonging to any particular people or any particular people who spoke a particular language or any sector, communal ideas or anything of that sort. But then after some time, there was this division of states into linguistic provinces during the 1956 or 57. Then the idea came in that Mumbai should be bilingual. There was a huge outcry. There was a whole lot of resistance to it. In fact, there was a lot of violence which led to it. And then finally, they decided to split the entire. Originally, Gujarat and Mumbai were one state. Bombay were one state. Then they decided to split the state into two: Gujarat to the west and Mumbai to the other side of the entire undivided state, what was originally known as Bombay province. And then Bombay became a part of the Maharashtra with Marathi as the dominant language and culture. And Gujarat retained its culture. So thereafter also, I would say that quite some time, this cosmopolitan culture continued, but then there has been gradual reduction in the type of culture that I have noticed over the period, right from the 40s till 20s of 2020s. Well, I suppose these are all the vicissitudes of a country, a city development that you can see. But the worst period was when I was confronted with the commission work, about which I'm sure you're going to ask me more questions. That was the period when I noticed that the cosmopolitan nature of the city had been completely shattered, and we became a situation of us versus them.
Certainly. We are going to address the work of the commission that you presided over and the riots which took place in the early 90s in Bombay. But before that, again, because most of our audience is probably not familiar with lawyering in Bombay at the time, what was the sort of background of lawyers and judges, again, in the 70s, 80s, when you were yourself a lawyer and then you started to work as a judge?
When I started, I think until the year 1956, if I remember rightly, we still had English judges, and the last English Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court was in the year 55, after which Chief Justice Chagla became the first Indian Chief Justice. And then thereafter, the number of Indian judges increased, and by the time I graduated and started my law practice, it was completely Indianized. In 62, when I started, we had only Indian judges. There were the style of dress also had changed, although initially I had seen portraits in the courtrooms of English judges with their long gowns and long hair wigs and gowns and things like that. That had given way to only the black gowns for the lawyers, no wigs. But still, a lot of English etiquette was maintained inside the courtrooms. In fact, I remember when I was a young man who was entering the courtroom for the first time, I had a sense of trepidation. I didn't want to make noise with my shoes. I tiptoed into the room. I felt as if I was entering into the premises of a temple or a church or something of that sort. But I'm afraid today people just walk into the courtroom, even in the Supreme Court, and behave as if they're walking into a bar or a pub or something like that. That is a drastic change I've noticed in the cultural milieu of the people, the youngsters.
That's interesting because the image we have from the outside when we come to India and we go to a given court is that it's still relatively sacred, but you're saying that apparently it's not as it was before.
It's not, I mean, I have seen what was really the sacred atmosphere of the courts from the time I became a lawyer in 1962. And in 2020, I see how it has slowly declined and deteriorated. Well, even today it's maintained to a certain degree. I wouldn't say it's totally vanished, but the way it is decreasing, the way it is diminishing, I'm sure one day it will come when people will be absolutely, it'll totally vanish.
Well, a report I published, well, I was going to say on a daily basis, but almost really, actually every year on the state of the Indian judiciary, you know, the case log, the fact that we might have to wait for 100 years really for all the cases to be addressed. How was it to work as a judge when you started, and what are the differences with what you've seen later in your career?
Okay. The reason why I became a lawyer is itself a very fortuitous one. I wanted, you know, it was in the early 50s, and as young students, we were impressed by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the Prime Minister, and the setting up of the Atomic Energy Commission, Dr. Homi Bhabha, who was his first director. We were all starry-eyed with physics and things like that. So naturally, I was drawn into the scientific milieu. I studied physics and mathematics at my graduate level, and I wanted to become to study quantum physics or nuclear physics, whichever option was available. I had even applied for it. Admission was granted, and there was a vacation period after which I was supposed to pay up the fees, the term fees. My father, as I told you, was a lawyer, and we were having dinner one day during the interim period, and he casually made a remark and said, "You can't be a good lawyer unless you have some special type of intellect or something." Unfortunately, I can never resist a challenge. So I told him, "If you can be a good lawyer, I can be a better lawyer." That sort of irritated him and said, "Son, it's easy to talk, but it is difficult to show it in practice." I said, "Okay, I'll show it to you practice." Next day, I went and applied to the law school. And the professor of physics was waiting for me. Deadline for payment of fees were getting over. He got panicky, called me up one day and said, "Are you having any financial trouble? I'll pay the first term fees. Why don't you come and join from tomorrow?" So I told him, "Sorry, sir, I'll come and explain to you what the predicament is." I went and told him why I had decided to become a lawyer. He said, "You are a big fool. You had a glorious career in front of you. Why are you forsaking it?" Well, I said, I've thrown my dice and I'm going to stick by it. And I stuck by it. But I always say that the loss of the legal world was the gain of the scientific world, thereby. And why I became a judge is another curious circumstance, fortuitous circumstance. In the year 1990, sorry.
Go ahead, and I kindly remind everyone to mute your mic because we don't want to hear you.
Yeah, somebody was talking.
So how did you become a judge then?
But I was happy. I was young, ambitious, and very hardworking. In fact, I used to work quite a lot, unbelievably. That's one habit which I carried through till now. And I did make a good lawyer, made a lot of money, and I was very popular and sought after lawyer at the Bombay Bar. One day in the year 1990, and I used to quite frequently go to Delhi in those days also, take the early morning flight, go to Supreme Court, finish a matter, come back in the evening, and carry on with the next day. And one day I had gone there, I came back, and I found a slip of paper on my table in the library saying that the Chief Justice wants to urgently meet you. So I thought something with some matter probably. So I went to him and said, yes, Chief, you wanted to see me? He said, sit down. And then he said, Srikrishna, I want you to become a judge. I said, why me, Chief? I'm happy being a lawyer. Why should I become a judge? Then he told me what was sad state of affairs at that time. There were 7 judges of the Bombay High Court who were under a cloud. There were all kinds of allegations made against them of impropriety, outright corruption and things like that. So as a result of which, the then Chief Justice had withdrawn work from them. And the government also later on transferred 3 of them out of the Bombay High Court to some other state. So, and then virtually there was a vacancy of 7 judges because work was not being given to 7 judges who were under cloud. So he told me, the Chief Justice told me, and he said, well, you know the situation now. So it is up to you young fellows to come and help me in resurrecting the glory of this great High Court with a century and a half. So I said, Chief, give me a week's time. Let me consult my wife because I don't know whether I'll be, because the salary in those days was a pittance. It was, when I became a judge, it was hardly about 8,000 rupees or something like that. Unimaginable. And no other facilities of any kind. No car, no quarters, no nothing. So I said, let me talk to my wife and I'll come back. I talked to my wife. My wife said, look, it's an opportunity for you to do something for the country. If you have made up your mind, if you think you want to do it, I'll go with you. Never mind whatever the salary that they give, you'll be able to manage life. Because of I decided to do this again and then told the Chief Justice and said, yeah, I'm becoming a Chief Judge. And then from then I never looked back. I was happy as a judge till the day I retired from the Supreme Court in 2006.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm sure it's inspiring for a number of our colleagues and younger people here as well. Tell me, from this initial work as judge, how have you been appointed, selected to preside over this committee, the famous Bombay one, and then we hear about your report, which is entitled On the Basis of Your Name. What happened and why have you been chosen for that?
That is another curious incident. I was just about a year and a half. In July 1990, I became a judge, and the riot started in 92, early days of December 92. As soon as Babri Masjid was demolished on 6th of December 1992, to be precise. So it was hardly a year and out. I was a judge. I was number 3 from the bottom of the list of 26 judges in Bombay. So when the riots took over Bombay for a period of almost 1 month in December and again 1 month in January, the government of India decided to set up a commission of inquiry under the Commission of Inquiries Act. And then because it was a very high priority public importance issue, they requested the Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court to appoint a sitting judge to hold the commission. So at that time, a colleague of mine, she was a lady, she was the Chief Justice at that time. She went through the entire gamut of list from the senior most to the lowest and started asking people and saying, will you do this, will you do this? For some reason or the other, everybody shied away and said, I don't want to get into this, I don't. And when it came to me, 3rd from the bottom, I was young, willing to do, climb up mountains and dive into the oceans. So I said, okay, I'm willing to do it. I don't know anything about it. I'm willing to do it. She said, excellent. Shall I recommend your name? I said, yeah, but I have one small reservation which I must point out before I accept the commission. She said, what is the reservation? I said, the commission is going to investigate into riots between Hindus and Muslims. And I'm a practicing Hindu and I hold my practice of Hinduism right on my forehead. On every Friday, you'll see me sitting in the court with a big tika on my forehead. So do you think the Muslims will have some faith in what I say or what I'm supposed to do? She looked at me for a few seconds and said, Srikrishna, let me ask you a question. that when you don your gown and sit in the court, do you consider yourself a Hindu or a Muslim or a Parsi or what? I said, no, I consider myself a judge. Then at that point of time, I do not think of myself as belonging to anything. He said, that is the spirit. If you can think of that, go ahead and you'll succeed. I said, okay. I said, I accepted it. Next day, I was given an order of appointment by the government of India under the recommendations of the Chief Justice. And I started it. Oh, there were all kinds of hiccups when it was being done, all kinds of objections were raised, all kinds of things. But I managed to swim through all that. And although I must confess that the commission's work was extended, because by the time I was halfway through, the Shiv Sena came up as the party in power, and most of the evidence that was being recorded showed that the Shiv Sena had a strong role in the riots, and therefore they were not very happy with what was going on. So promptly they issued a notification and disbanded the commission, saying that too much time has gone by and nothing is going to come out of it. Again, another incident, again fortuitous incident. At that time, I think Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister in the country. The BJP, or in its earlier avatar, was ruling the country. It was the party. And Shiv Sena was a part of the government at the center. So there was a lot of furor as a result of that. Newspapers wrote articles, all kinds of letters were written to the authorities, to the Prime Minister and all that. Finally, that government of Mr. Vajpayee lasted only for 2 weeks, I think. On the last day before resigning in Parliament, he wrote a personal letter to the then Chief Minister of Maharashtra, who belonged to Shiv Sena, saying that this is a very important issue which must be continued. Therefore, I strongly urge you to resurrect the commission. So like the Lord Jesus, I was also resurrected, called upon to continue with the commission where I left off. Another year and a half, I completed it, and I turned in my report. And the report is there in public domain for all of you to read. And I'm sure all of you must have read it. So that was the long history of the commission's work.
Absolutely. I very much encourage everyone to read this report. It's a very important report in terms of Indian history, world history, but also because, as you said, your independence, your impartiality had been praised at that time, and again has been praised many times since that particular incident, since that particular tragedy. And that's one of the reasons you have been able to engage in many other important discussions. So tell us now from Bombay and this work at the court, how have you moved up to the Supreme Court and to Delhi?
My life has had a series of fortuitous incidents. I was moved out of Bombay somewhere in 2001 and posted as Chief Justice of Kerala. Kerala is God's own country, as they call it. So I was very happy. The bar was very cooperative, and I was doing my regular work as a judge. And then by that time, I had risen in the All India seniority of the High Court judges to be, as I call they call it the consideration zone for being elevated as a judge of the Supreme Court. At that time, the BJP was still in power. So the same Chief Minister who had been indicted by me in the commission and subsequently in another election petition in the Bombay Court happened to be the speaker in the center of Speaker of the Lok Sabha. Apparently he was dead against saying that this man should not be brought to the Supreme Court at any cost. So there was a lot of paper pushing back and forth. In the Supreme Court used to be tough in those days. Supreme Court would not accept nonsense. So there used to be a lot of correspondence saying that. And finally, as again my good luck could have it, there was a learned judge who was number 2 in the Supreme Court at that time, who was immediately to become a Chief Justice within 6 months, who was from Bombay High Court, who had seen me from my bar days and who knew me both as a lawyer and as a judge of the Bombay High Court. He said nothing doing. He put his foot down and said, I want this man to be eliminated at any cost, failing which I shall not make any further recommendations, whatever the number of vacancies. And since he sat tight on that, And because of the law at that time, thanks to the Keshwananda Bharati and the third judge's case judgment, the government had to appoint me. Willy-nilly, the government appointed me as a judge of the Supreme Court. But by that time, a lot of time had been lost, and I had hardly a career of less than a little short of 4 years in the Supreme Court. I didn't get much time in the Supreme Court. In 2006, promptly having reached the age of 65, I retired from Supreme Court.
Well, you know the saying, and I think it's inspired from the work of Justice Bhagwati, supreme but not infallible. So how was your work at the Supreme Court, and can you maybe explain to our audience how it works on a daily basis? It's slightly different from the British system, although of course there is some sort of inspiration.
Yeah.
How, original is it? How do you work, and what was the main or maybe a few very important moments at the time for you?
The Supreme Court has two different jurisdictions. The original jurisdiction, where the Supreme Court can try original suits between states and states, or between the central government and the states, center and states, or between states. It also has the original constitutional jurisdiction to try what are known as to issue what are known as high prerogative writs, like writ of habeas corpus, quo warranto, etc. Basically, it is envisaged as a repository of constitutional power and vested with the authority to ensure that the other organs of the polity work within the constitutional parameters. So, the organs of the polity are usually the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive.
Sorry, Justice Srikrishna, I think you've muted yourself.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Got it? Yeah. The judiciary has the unique role of keeping the other branches within the constitutional bounds by issuing the high prerogative writs. Now, thanks to Justice Bhagwati, whom you mentioned, at this time, they invented a new methodology of ensuring that justice is available to the lowest strata of society, to the persons who may be unable to access the courts because of their ignorance, because of their lack of education, and finally because of their economical hardships. Now, normally in British jurisprudence, there is always this concept of locus standi. That means no person who has a cause can enter into court. Supposing A and B are fighting in the court, I have nothing to do with, I can't step into their case and say, I want to be heard. I will never be heard. So this was the law in India also, except that by devising this new methodology called the public interest litigation, they gave a go-by to the this famous doctrine of locus standi. Now, why was it necessary? Now, let us assume that there is poverty was writ large in those days, and even now the percentage of poor and uneducated people is quite high in India. Now, a person at the lowest stratum, because of lack of information, lack of knowledge, and lack of economic sustenance, may not be able to go to the Supreme Court and bring out a case by engaging a lawyer or even arguing himself about an redemption from an injustice that is done to him. In such a situation, the Supreme Court said, hey, look, anybody who is interested in this man, like a social activist or a NGO, non-government organization, or a lawyer who is public-spirited, can file a petition on his behalf. He'll hear that and give relief not to the person filing it, but to the person who is affected by it. That is how the Bandhwa Musti cases were there. A series of cases have come up, and the TIL jurisdiction has grown and grown and grown. It's grown so hard, so big, that today Supreme Court is finding it difficult. So as a result of which, what happens in the Supreme Court? Now you're talking about how the Supreme Court functions. The Supreme Court also has the appellate jurisdiction of being the last appeal by special leave. Now, special leave is something like originally the Privy Council used to be the appellate authority for all appeals against the Indian High Courts, where you have to apply to the Privy Council and obtain special leave to appeal. Same thing has been continued in the Supreme Court under the Constitution, where a person, otherwise, basically, the last appeal is to be decided by the respective High Court of the state. After that, there is only an appeal known as appeal by special leave. You petition the Supreme Court for special leave and say, these are the extraordinary circumstances, please help me because grave injustice has been done or grave public harm will be caused by this kind of a law being carried forward. Now, initially when the thing started during Justice Bhagwati's time, judges were very selective in that. So they really examined the case and ensured that the PIL was the really public interest litigation. Nowadays, it has deteriorated into profit interested litigation or publicity interest litigation or persecution interest litigation. But what has happened is that in the Supreme Court, there are usually 2 days on which we used to do this work, on Mondays and Fridays. There would be approximately 100 matters to be heard on each day. 100 matters to be heard on a Friday is terrible because you are working full time up to Thursday. And on Thursday evening, you have a table full of almost 100 matters. You have to sit through the night, read it, and be ready in the morning. And you must have, Laila, at least you must have seen in the Supreme Court how things function. You give hardly 2 minutes to even the topmost counsel. Either he makes his point within 2 minutes or he gets thrown out summarily. Now, that's a highly discretionary remedy. Therefore, this works like that. But the workload is unbelievably heavy. So that is how in the Supreme Court work has to be done. And only between half a day of Monday and half a day of Friday, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you manage to hear final hearing matters. The backlog keeps on increasing because the number of judges, although at that time there used to be 26, at any given time there would be at least 10 to 15% vacancies. They were not promptly filled. And now it has become, now the Supreme Court is, I'm told it has increased to 32 and all 32 are in position. But the number of vacancies in the High Court and the subordinate courts is unbelievably high. So there is always this backlog of cases. The biggest problem in Indian judiciary is your inability to bring a matter before a judge for resolution. If once it comes before the judge is able to at least look at it and if it is so minded, give you the prompt relief. But till it comes before the judge, there is a long delay. And that is what is really haunting the good work being done by the judges.
It is certainly very challenging. It's good that you're addressing these issues. It's very difficult to talk about the Supreme Court without talking about the appeal, really. What, Pendra Bakshi, Professor Bakshi, named as a sort of social interest litigation. But as you said, these sort of extraordinary remedies today have changed very much. They are maybe addressing very, very different things. But from one of the many cases you have worked on, is there any appeal litigation, which you have in mind, which is of particular interest and you'd like to share with us, or they were
in a short span of about 4 years, I did hundreds of cases. First few days, at least 1 year, I sat on the bench which was hearing criminal law matters, and I've rendered a number of. I don't think individual cases would be of interest to you. And then I did constitutional matters on tricky constitutional issues. Then I also one case I remember was, you remember Harshad Mehta, who had deedled a whole number of people, banks of money during those periods. One of his cases came up before me, and then in a bench which I remember, and it was argued by no less than Ram Jethmalani for 8 days. But finally, despite the fact that actually it was a case, it was an appeal brought by one of the banks which had been defrauded. So despite the fact that there was strong opposition to it from the government lawyers, from the lawyer of Harshad Mehta, finally I said, no, that bank is right. Whatever money it has been defrauded, it has to be given back to it. That was an interesting case, but it was not one of, I wouldn't say it was one of those public interest cases where media publishes it and becomes the highlight of the TV discussion that you find every day. And we didn't have this kind of discussion in those days. People were, occasionally you would find headlines in the newspapers, but not, lawyers were not giving interviews, judges were not giving interviews, and TV had nothing to do with the Supreme Court, except mentioning that such and such a matter was heard and such and such a matter was decided in such and such a manner. Now today you find all matters which are under trial are being discussed and people propound what should be the solution to that, what should be the outcome of that, why it should be decided in this fashion or that fashion. I don't know how much of good or bad that is. Well, that issue is also pending before the Supreme Court. They will take a call on that.
Exactly, and actually here you give me the very good transition towards the next sort of step in our discussion, your role in committee. You, as I said, have become the preferred former justice of all sorts of governments, and you have been writing and supporting different reports, one in particular, and that's the transition, data protection, right to privacy. Can you tell us a little bit about this report?
First of all, let me say how the transition came about. I retired, to be precise, on 21st of May 2006, right? Upon reaching the age of 65. And then I think immediately next day I said, I'm going back to Bombay, although my secretary was shocked. He said, you can keep the bungalow, you can keep the staff, you can keep the cars for another 30 days. I said, thank you very much. Get me a ticket for tomorrow morning. My wife and I are flying back to Bombay. So we came back to Bombay. And the next day I was going on a walk somewhere and I get a call from the then finance minister saying that, Judge, I want you to help the country in some manner. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, we have to set up the sixth sixth pay commission, and I want you to chair the pay commission. I said, hey, look, I'm a lawyer and a judge. What do I know about pay commissions and all that? Why don't you ask one of your secretaries to do it? He said, no, sir, apart from the fact that it involves finance, which I'm sure you will be able to come up on top. Your authority, moral authority is so high that if you say that this has to be done in a particular manner, people will accept it without creating any problem. That is the greatest value that you have by your reputation. Please accept it. I said, okay, I agreed. And then the fixed finance commission. Then I said, first thing you have to do in the finance commission is make sure that the people at the bottom get the money. So I said, all police constables, all primary students, primary teachers, all people at the lowest strata should be first given a higher rise, and then we shall think of what can be done for the people at the top level going up to the chief secretary, etc. They say that all good things done by you are not remembered, but the bad things are remembered by you. And I remember, I've done a whole lot of stuff in my life, but people, wherever I go, particularly government servants, teachers, professors, anybody who has got anything to do with pension, immediately say, oh, we remember you, sir, because you gave us 300% increase in our salary and pension benefits. So that was somewhat challenging. But I said, okay, let me understand how it works, and then I had no difficulty. Then that led to the Andhra committee bifurcation. Again, by that time, the same gentleman had become the home minister, and he said, that was a very peculiar situation. A sudden an announcement was made of bifurcation, and that created so much of riots in Andhra. So he desperately called me and said, I want to give out your name in public by an announcement that you will be the chairman of this committee, which will go into the issue of bifurcation. I said, why involve me? I have nothing to do with it. He said, no. He said, your stature is such, the moment I announce it, the riots will go down. Then I'll give you 18 months time in which you can work out for solutions and present it to the government. And he was right. The moment he came onto the TV and I announced that the commission was going to be headed by me, the riots stopped. And then I had 18 months to go in. And I had to travel throughout Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, looking at the thing, talking to people, understanding their economic situations, education situation, and various factors. Finally, that was produced. Then we had the FSLRC. The Financial Sector Legislative Commission, again the same process. I get a call from my minister saying that this is very important. We want to change the entire financial architecture in the country. So I said, I know nothing about it. Why do you want to ask me to do it? He said, no, no, no. You have at least, you're a studious person. If I give you some time, you'll be able to do good work. So I did. And that was hailed as one of the best reports produced. In fact, I remember just Mr. Arun Jaitley, who was then finance minister of the BJP government, in a public lecture said, this is one of the excellent reports produced in this country, which must be implemented. I don't know what happened thereafter. Everybody's enthusiasm flagged. And then finally, we come to the data protection. Data protection is itself another interesting story. After finishing something else, I was supposed to go to New York by the midnight flight. I was still in Delhi at that time. So I got a call from the present law minister saying that in Hindi, he tells me and said, please, you must accept this. We want to have a committee to go into the question of data protection issue to frame an appropriate law. I said, I don't know anything about data protection. In any case, by the midnight, I'm supposed to fly out to New York. I have no time to think about it. He said, don't worry, sir. All that I need is a yes from you so that on Monday morning, we can tell the Supreme Court that you have agreed. And the interesting thing is, the Aadhaar matter was going on before the Supreme Court, during which the Supreme Court asked the crucial question and said, hey, but where is the law on data protection, personal data protection in this country? So everybody looked around and said, they had to admit there was no law. So on Monday morning, they promptly announced to the court and said, we are setting up a high-powered committee headed by Justice Srikrishna to go into this question within a period of 2 years to give us a report, and we'll frame a law on that. The Supreme Court said, okay, and then Supreme Court noted it in one paragraph in that other judgments have said, now that the committee has been formed under the chairmanship of so and so, it is expected, blah, 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 etc. And initially, I didn't know anything, honestly. In fact, there was hardly anybody in the country who talked about data protection at that time. So, question then was, we had to look at what was happening elsewhere. Then we had, for example, GDPR. Then we had South African law. We had some other countries in Europe having a law. Singapore was still drafting a law. So we looked at all that and said, well, this is good for us, this is not good for us. This is from our point of view, implementable, not implementable. So we looked at the good points and tried to make some kind of a report, put it in public domain, calling it a white paper, and inviting people to come with their responses. I had 6 or 7 meetings in major cities of the country, inviting people to give their responses. And the responses came all over from the world. I must confess that academics, lawyers, professors, practitioners, laymen, they came out with interesting responses. They were all collated, and finally a report and a draft of the law was made in 2018, submitted to the government. And the day the government sat on that for quite some time. And then finally in 2018, 19, they came out with their own version of the data protection law, but did a good thing. This also because I was prompting, I think, the media people asked me and said, any law which has to be done has to go before the joint parliamentary committee because it's an expert issue. It cannot be just voted in parliament with people don't understanding the issue. So they promptly sent to the joint parliamentary committee where it is pending. And the joint parliamentary committee is seeking responses from all knowledgeable persons. And hopefully, I'm told that in the next session, the bill will again be presented to Parliament. So that is the story of the data protection law. Now,
thank you so much. Yeah.
You asked a very pointed question and say, why is it that every government wants you are the go-to person for every government? For the simple reason, because I do not hold brief for any party in power. Now, I look at the issue, and if the issue is challenging enough, I bring all my talents to it and come out with a solution. The solution may be accepted, not accepted, that is not my job. But I shall honestly study the problem and give whatever is my considered view in the matter independently. That has been my stock in trade, which I have continued. And that perhaps is attractive enough to people with divergent views.
It certainly is. And again, you're giving me a great transition before we move to the questions, because we've received a number of really interesting questions. The last sort of issue I'd like to address with you, you're very open about your faith. You said, I'm a practicing Hindu, and you told us the story in Bombay, and you asked yourself at the time whether it was going to be a problem. But at the same time, as you said, you're extremely independent, and the history has shown that you're also very impartial. You are a student of Indian philosophy and the law. I know that you can read very well Sanskrit, which is not easy. You can read a number of ancient texts. So tell us, has it influenced your work, and to what extent?
Yes, it has. I confess that from childhood, I've been brought up in a very conservative, very traditional type of family background. I also studied under great masters, which has really influenced the thinking that I have. Now, for example, what you thought of as human rights as having been imported from abroad. In fact, I gave a lecture in the NUJS, National University of Juridical Sciences in Calcutta, at the instance of Justice Ramapal. I was invited there to say that concept of human rights was very much there in ancient India, and it is not an imported issue. So where does it exist? How does it exist? Why was it that there was no mechanics for expression of that? Is itself a very great subject to be debated sometime. And I believe, as a Hindu, the great thing about Hinduism, if it is understood properly, it's a very Catholic religion. Now, I can be a Hindu and I can pray to Allah. I can be a Hindu and I can pray to Christ, or to Zeus, or to some other Buddha, or any other Jaina, or some other thing. Because I believe in the philosophy of Shankaracharya, the greatest master that this country has produced. What did he say? He said, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. He said, at the ultimate level, there is only one entity, and that is you yourself. Unfortunately, you are unable to discern that you are the great entity which produces all this in the world. The moment you discern it, the moment you experience it, you are what they call a Jivan Mukta. So if you notice, all the great personalities like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Aurobindo, to name two of them, Sai Baba, all the people, they were like that. To them, the whole world was theirs. So everybody, if I consider you as myself, how can I ever be violent against you? I'm not violent to my finger, I'm not violent to my nose, am I? So similarly, if I consider the whole world to be myself, I can't be violent. I can't have any of this pettiness towards anybody. I remember, as a young boy, I used to see in the university a plaque which said, Savidyaya Vimuktaye. That means that is education which leads to liberation. Liberation from what? Well, in the very ultimate philosophical sense, liberation from this cycle of birth and death. At the sociological level, liberation from pettiness, jealousy, violence, backbiting, and all the things that make us small. That is the way I look at it. And one final thing is, there is a very interesting saying in the Padma Purana. It says, Atmana Pratikulani Pareshanna Samacharit, which I believed completely from beginning to end. So whatever is bad unto you, do not do it to the others. If I feel bad about somebody stealing my pocket, I don't want to pick somebody's pocket. If I feel bad about somebody hurting me, I should not hurt. This is what I have believed, and tried to leave it to the best of my ability till now. And in the rest of the few years that are left to me before the sands of time run out, I continue to do that.
Thank you ever so much. Again, it's extremely inspiring, and I felt it was important these days to explain your vision, really. So let's move to the questions, if you don't mind, because
sure, no problem.
We've received a number of really interesting questions here from a variety of people in the audience. I'll start with the first one from Tony. Thank you for sharing your amazing story. Do you think the Western liberal conception of democracy and human rights have greatly influenced the Indian legal and political system?
This question, I think I anticipated perhaps. according to me, human dignity, human rights was emphasized very much in our scriptures. And all that I need to do is look at how it developed in the West, look at how it developed in the East, and make an amalgam of it. So I have no problem at all. There is no question of influencing by the West. Well, influencing the West, if you shut your eyes to what has already happened in the East. But if you keep your mind open, then you see this is nothing but a leveling of the water in two different containers.
Absolutely. Don't you think as well, despite the fact that the Indian constitution is absolutely beautiful, of course, it's been inspired from, variety.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's also a lot of interpretation, isn't it? And you explain how you interpret.
Yeah, law of interpretation has a whole series of principles. When you interpret, you have to interpret by looking at the context, by looking at what is the best that can be done. How does it serve purpose of justice if I do it? And the concept of justice is really individualized. Because what do you think is justice? Now somebody may say that if I commit theft, cutting off my hand is justice. Is that justice at all? Does it really carry forward the human dignity? Does it carry forward the human rights? Now you remember that famous story from the Bible that he who has never sinned can come and cast the first stone. Mary Magdalene, I think, was the victim there. So that is the way you have to look at it. If you look at it that way, you look at the human being and the human being's dignity, and you won't have any problems.
Thank you very much again. Another question from Lorraine. As someone who has witnessed the Mumbai riot as a child, people have still not found closure. The Supreme Court still has to give final say on some cases related to the Mumbai riots. Why has there been so much delay? Isn't justice delayed, justice denied?
First of all, the report itself was rejected outright by the then government. Then against that, there were petitions in the Bombay High Court. The Bombay High Court did not interfere. Then for implementation of the report, then there was a matter in the case in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court took a long time, but bit by bit said, why don't you do this? So-and-so has been found to be indicted here. Why don't you try it out? Supreme Court gave a series of orders. And I don't know whether it's still pending or it has been disposed of. I'm not sure of that also. But, well, people are half satisfied, and half dissatisfied. But one thing is sure. The commission, although a commission of inquiry does not have a binding power for its orders like a court decree, help in some kind of a catharsis for the people who are overwrought. People, you see, when people think that the state is against, normally if you have a problem, you run to the state and ask the state to remedy it. I mean, as a student of political philosophy, you will tell us that if the state is complicit in causing injustice to you, what do? Then you look outside the state, and that is how the series of bombs took place. That is how our neighboring country helped people bring bombs and throw them, that series of bombs in March. But when you find a sympathetic ear, somebody who is willing to listen to you, irrespective of whether he can do something or not, you feel calm. You feel that this is at least a place where somebody will listen to you. And that was the greatest effect that the commission produced. I can't claim anything more than that, but I did listen to them very carefully, and I was sympathetic to them.
Thank you very much again for this really important response to the question. Another question from our colleague, Dr. Ramani Garimela from South Asian University. Justice Srikrishna ji, thank you. How do you see the role of the registry in the way the court work is managed, being managed? How's the work of the registry actually in the way the court works?
I take it that the question is with regard to what is happening now. Because in my days, I did not have this kind of a difficulty at all. Now, I don't know. I've been out of the Supreme Court for how many years now? 16 years. And there has been strong voice. For example, the president of the Bar Association, Mr. Dave, himself, the Dushyant Dave, has written a very strong letter to the Chief Justice and the Register saying that the registry is being manipulated as a result of which things are being brought to the table of the judge, irrespective of when the case was filed, only because somebody has influence. Now, how far that is true, how far that is not true, I don't know. The proper investigation only can tell. I'm sitting 1,000 miles away from the Supreme Court. I have no way of examining critically the voice. But one thing is sure, that this morning also I read a very interesting article in the Indian Express by Pratap Bhanu Mehta. Yesterday there was one in the Hindu by one of the senior counsel from Chennai, Mr. Panchu, criticizing the Supreme Court for giving so much importance to a particular case, while the cases of so many others are languishing there, which ought to have been remedied immediately. Now, what effect that will produce, let's see. I have no way of saying anything more than that.
Yeah, thank you very much again. Another question from Shivami, it has to do as well with the cases backlog. Will filling up the existing judicial vacancies in the High Court and the Supreme Court, I suppose I've lost the question, sorry, will filling up the existing judicial vacancies in the High Court and District Court suffice in meeting the backlog of cases in India?
According to me, yes. In fact, there was a paper written by the former Chief Information Commissioner giving statistical analysis of how it can be done. And he had said that if you were to promptly fill every vacancy the moment it arises or the next day, so the number of cases to be decided and disposed of remain the same. The quality of the judges also remain the same. It's possible within a foreseeable period of 2 or 3 years, the entire backlog can be executed. I think there is strong point in that. In fact, I have recommended to the Supreme Court. Let's see what the Supreme Court does. I have personally written an email to the Chief Justice of India in this regard.
So you might be asked for another report then?
I hope not. I'm too old for that, I think.
Thank you very much again. We have a few more questions, and some of them are really very important and interesting again. A question from Dhruti. How do you see women in Indian judiciary? Do you think equal opportunity is given? It's a question we can ask ourselves here in the UK and in Europe generally.
And I think, Leila, you are working on that, or no? If the last time I met you, you were telling me you're trying to produce a paper on that or a book on that or something else. Anyway, how do I see, in the sense, by way of opportunities? Now, as far as I remember, when I started my career, there were only 2 women in the entire bar library. One became a judge of the Supreme Court subsequently, and one lady, unfortunately, died prematurely. Now, a long time I haven't been to the Bar Association, either in the High Court or in the Supreme Court. At least 1/3 I see there are women who are there. Now, the question is, how many of them really continue? They come up with, in fact, in my office, every year, I get scores of applications saying that we want to work with you as an intern. And most of them, and maybe 2/3 of them, are women. Now, the question is, they are enthusiastic to start with. How far they manage to do it is an issue that has a lot of sociological ramifications. Now, you know, Indian society has a very peculiar way of dealing with the married women. Then they say the priority should be the husband, the wife, the husband, the children, and the family, and nothing else. So and what happens is, if you go consider it from the point of an employer, he says, for the salary that I give you, I want your full attention. I don't want your attention to be diverted saying, my child is sick, I can't come today. My husband is sick, I won't be able to come. Tomorrow, my husband wants to go on a vacation and take the family, I want to go out. Or I'm going to have a child, therefore give me 8 months. Now we have increased it to childbirth is something like 6 months maternity leave there. So this is one way the people look at it. Now there is a lot to be said in favor of making the ground level to women, but it will take a long time. The law itself has really not caught up on that. But the quality of women judges, I have great things to admire. I have known one of my colleagues in the Supreme Court is a brilliant lady. And if anybody said lady judge, she would get very annoyed. One day she asked me and said, are you called gentleman judge? I said, no, I'm just called a judge. She said, similarly, I am a judge. The fact that I am a lady or a woman is subordinate to my being a judge. I mean, that is the spirit with which they should come up. I'm sure they will come up. It takes
Surely.
time. You know, this is an issue that has been carried over, you know, like the backlog in the courts. It will take a long time to resolve it. I'm sure it will get resolved someday. Even in West, why it took such a long time. When did the women in the America get right to vote? It's only after the suffragettes, isn't it? Similarly, it takes some time.
Indeed, and despite the suffragettes, you know, in this very country, the number of women at the highest level of the judiciary is really very little, very, very.
Yeah. In fact, if you remember, the one who recently passed away, late Justice Ginsburg, was once asked in the Supreme Court, what do you think would be the appropriate number of women judges? And he said, the day the Supreme Court has 9 women judges, I think that is appropriate.
Mm.
You know, Supreme Court of the US has only 9 judges.
Very good. So now you're going to be remembered as a feminist as well. That's very good.
Well, I don't know. You can call me a feminist or this is or that is. I look at it from the human point of view.
Absolutely.
To me, that is the crux of the whole thing. That is the fulcrum around which all these various theories revolve. If the theory conforms to my concept of human dignity, I will accept it. If it does not, I'll reject it.
Thank you very much. That's a very good point again. Another question from our colleague, Dr. Suti Saharia. You have talked about the rather towering role of the Supreme Court as the guardian of the Constitution. There is a growing concern that the Supreme Court has become increasingly arbitrary and selective in the way it deals with issues of liberty and freedom of expression. Does it worry you?
Again, I say, I'm sitting 1,000 miles away from 1,000 kilometers away from Delhi. So it's very difficult to analyze the work, except because I have no direct access to what is happening. I'm not on the spot. I can only read judgments. I can only read criticism. There is criticism, growing criticism of the Supreme Court saying that it has not been functioning as it was intended to practice. It has, in fact, the recent public utterance of the Chief Justice of India was also criticized. He said, we are going to dilute the impact of Article 32 by sending people back to high courts for writ petitions. And somebody has yesterday only criticized and said that, hey, look, Article 32 is itself a fundamental right. Moving the Supreme Court itself is a fundamental right. How can you do anything? You can't, if a man comes to you and say fundamental right has been affected, you have to jolly well hear him and pass any order. Decide what you want, but you have to hear him. You can't tell him go to somebody else. I mean, it's not like a shopkeeper saying that I don't want to do business today, go to the next man. So this kind of criticism has been there. Now, how much of legitimacy is there can only be told over a period of time. It is very difficult to assess the institution on what happens on a particular day. Yes, in the last few years, there has been severe criticism. Now, how much of the criticism can be validated, will happen, can be answered only after some time. You know, something like this. If I go to a doctor and take an ECG today, that makes no sense. The doctor will first ask me, say, Wendy, where is your last ECG? Show it to me. It is as compared to the last ECG that my ECG today will show me whether my heart is good or bad. Now, that's some kind of an exercise has to be carried out like that. Now, the ECG of past as the ECG of present will have to be compared before the Supreme Court is evaluated.
Yes, it's, I suppose, a very good point. Time matters, history will tell, and we are also, you know, researchers, so we are not journalists. So for us, you know, it's important to take a step back and look at things in a longer term perspective. We had another question from our colleague Nupur Singh in Delhi. She was asking about the politicization of the court, of the Supreme Court, but I feel that somehow you've addressed this question already. Another question, it might be the last one because I'm a little bit conscious of time. It's late for you in Bombay. A question from our colleague, Dr. Karen McBride. Thank you for sharing your very interesting story. Fascinating to hear about your experiences. You talked earlier about being impartial with regard to religion. Have there been situations where you have found it taxing to be impartial, or is it just a given for your role as a judge or in writing your reports?
When I became a judge, I had to take an oath of office. the oath of office required me to do justice unto everybody without fear or favor, and the justice had to be according to law. Now, please note, justice in the abstract sense can be done only by the good Lord himself. I know I am not the good Lord. Therefore, I am called upon to take an oath and say, I will do justice according to the law established by Constitution. Now, what do I perceive as the law? What do I perceive as justice within the law is a matter of my conscience and my honesty of purpose. Now, as long as I can do it, the religion is not going to bother me at all. I have had, in fact, a very interesting thing. I'm a strict vegetarian. Laila will vouch for that. I'm a strict vegetarian. But, and also, there was a writ petition when I was sitting in the Bombay High Court. In fact, there are hundreds of writ petitions where liquor licenses were sought. So I was the one who granted it. So everybody was surprised. He said, how are you allowing it so liberally? I said, look, I look at the law. If the law is this, if the man has come into this, he is entitled to it. If the law doesn't come, I have nothing to do with my preferences there. Now, if a butcher comes to me, now whether he is entitled to slaughter the cattle or not is a matter determined by law. Now I look at the law, and within the parameters of the law, yes or no. Similarly, if Hindus and Muslims fight and break each other's heads, who is right or who is wrong is not determined by religion, but what happened there on the battlefield and in accordance with the laws that are applicable. So I see no difficulty at all. My oath of office requires me to do just. Now, if tomorrow they change the law in this country that only people of a certain religion only should be entitled to rights and people of other religions are not entitled, I don't know, the judgment have a difficulty. He might say, my conscience doesn't permit and quit the office. And fortunately for me, I'm not a judge at that point of time.
Thank you. Thank you ever so much, Justice Srikrishna, for this absolutely fascinating discussion. It was extremely inspiring to discuss with you, and also extremely important to address a number of issues we've discussed in terms of independence, impartiality, but also, what inspires your thinking, your practice, as again, a very independent and extremely well-regarded justice in India. Thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating. I'd like to thank the audience as well for being such a great audience and asking so many interesting questions. Thank you very much to my team as well, in particular her and Claudia, and obviously as well Olga for supporting this seminar. Well,
thank you, Laila. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, persons who I see on the screen. Karen, Ramani, Terence, Samira, and all the other persons whose names are there but who I don't see. Thank you very much. A good evening or a good afternoon or a good morning, depending on wherever you are situated in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much again. And next time, we've made a promise. This is going to be in Bombay. I'm the first one to fly, obviously. So you are all invited. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much.
We'll see you soon.